We are very excited to have Jerremie and Rita Clyde from Little Loaves Farm.
Let's go.
And we basically, who are you? And welcome to Meet Your Farmer. Jerremie and Rita have been one of the original farms that were part of YYC Growers. And so why don't you give us a little bit of background. What got you guys into farming?
Sure. So, it really started because of gardening. We used to garden on a pretty big scale with my folks. They sold their place, moved into a condo, then we started gardening on a friend's farm with them. And it was like, wow, we're growing like enough produce for ourselves and most of our friends. Just drive by and leave produce. And thought, well, we could grow for even more people. We could do market gardening. So just kind of kept progressing. And then eventually, because we wanted more control of the land and what was done and how it was cared for, we got our own farm.
Mm-hmm.
And really, we've discovered that you need to grow and engage with those things you like to eat and those things that, are culturally relevant, that you care about. So, and where we are now in Sundre, all the market gardening, a lot of the stuff we used to do down south of the city didn't work as well. We're more prone to frost, more prone to hail, more prone to voles and horrible things. So livestock started to make more sense, and grains. So we started out doing this sort of a pretty broad bunch of market garden type varieties, although lots of potatoes, because I love potatoes. I can't eat enough potatoes. And there's so many varieties of potatoes, and they're so awesome for so many things. If you have the right variety, it makes such a big difference. Mm-hmm. It's not just like yellow, red, or white. That is like the saddest approach to potatoes. Someone's lost there. And now we are in Sundre, we can not only do great potatoes because the soil pH is really low, so it's like perfect. Little did we know, but it is perfect for potatoes. We can also grow really good grains like rye, oats, barley, grains that really thrive in our province. And we're all used to eating wheat all the time, but those grains are key for so many reasons, and they taste so fantastic. Like rye flour tastes terrific. Pancakes, cookies, you name it. Flaked, like for oatmeal, it's not oatmeal because you've got rye and barley and stuff. I mean, Scandinavian countries do this well. Scotland does this well. And frankly, where we are in Sundre, our weather and stuff is actually worse than most Scandinavian countries, and certainly worse in Scotland. But those diets work really well there. And we also started getting into livestock.
Yeah. So we had this big piece of land, and we had our market garden. And we were trying to figure out what to do with the rest of the land. And then we had a friend who had a yak herd, and he needed a place to keep his yaks, and we had land. So we decided to work together. So we share our yak herd with Jonathan Wright of Thompson Small Farms.
Yep.
If you can see him at the Hillhurst Sunnyside Farmers Market. Is that
Yeah.
So he does chickens and yak meat there, and so we take care of the herd together, which is great because he's got a huge amount of expertise, and it's been wonderful having him.
A lot of my family, my mom's side farms, it was always dairy and beef, so I kind of grew up around that. And then initially, when we first got the land, previous owners had a grazing arrangement with one of our neighbors, the Van Curns, and they had beef, and we had looked at beef, and but where we are, I mean, the soil is hugely variable across our site. It's rolling kettle, knob and kettle type land with lots of peat bogs and wetlands and riparian areas. We've done tons of work around those riparian areas to make them healthy, but cattle are really hard on that type of land. At least the cattle we normally have, Simmenthals, the big ones you get for beef, they're so heavy, they smash up the land, they frankly eat too much, they need too much water. They're just not well suited, whereas the yaks are brilliantly suited to that land. They per pound, they take about a third less feed, a third less water. They're I like talking about their manure. The manure is really dry. It's more like wild game. So if you step in, it's not so bad. But they're also not losing water that way constantly. It breaks down really well with the type of microfauna that we have on site as well. You get cow patties lasting on our site, like petrified cow patties from when cattle was run there from years ago, whereas the yak manure doesn't last nearly so long on site. There was even supposed to be a research project where they were looking at what there is for insects and microorganisms for digesting cattle, bison, and yak manure naturally in our province. So we're looking at having to collect pills of it, send it off to the province, but that research project's on hold at the moment.
Yeah, so we are part of a lot of different research projects that are kind of going on. Sometimes we collaborate a little with people from Olds College. We practice intensive. What's the right term? Intensive grazing?
Modified
intensive.
Paddocks in there. The problem is the Yaks, there's a lot of people who do mob stalking, like the Reedners on their farm. It's fantastic for cattle, but the Yaks have very different social patterns. In a lot of ways, they're a bit like goats and less like cattle, or they're like short, they don't move, super silent ninja cows. So we use a paddock system to ensure better grazing. So sort of small grazing areas, you move them every 3 days. They resist predator pressure well. They handle the cold well. They have lovely coats. This year we sort of did some work with Thompson Small Farm for brushing them out. And brush out like the yearlings, the young ones, get their winter coats, nice, really long, soft fibers. We had like piles of fiber beside these yearlings that were the same size as the yearling.
Wow.
There's so much hair in them. It was awesome. And they really liked it. It was funny. We put them in the head gaiter, and the things I think they're going to freak out all is handling. So we're also doing their nails. It was like spa day as we trim their hooves and brush them out. They didn't like the hoof trimming part nearly so much. But the brushing, some of them, you let them out of the area we're working on them. And also I feel this nudging. I turn around, there's a yak there. Like, why did you stop? It's like having a really big dog. Keep petting me. Why'd you stop petting me? So some of them were really into the brushing. It was actually really kind of adorable.
That is very cute. So you've let us know kind of what got you into farming. It sounds like a little bit of just an evolution from growing vegetables in a garden.
Yeah, I mean we cared a lot about food. Really through the church we were doing stuff around food security. And the importance of everyone being able to eat and having good quality food that is culturally relevant. So really food sovereignty as well. And looking at how industrial farming works, most of my family does, we really wanted to do our own food and then wanted to expand that out. And you can't really do good food if you also don't really care for the creation that food is coming out of. So there's a strong kind of stewardship desire there too. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And so you're focusing mostly on yaks this year in particular. And I am curious about some of these research projects. What's led you to kind of going down that path?
I guess we've really tried to find ways to raise our animals in a way that takes care of the land that they're on. And I know that's something that a lot of people are interested in, and we just end up collaborating together.
It's a new site for us, for one. So we need to learn as much about it as possible because, we read tons of books on farming, and I grew up around farming.
I see them behind you there.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think only once ever have I read something in a book, then applied it, and it actually worked. It was this great rye then clover planting thing. But generally, because every site is so different for farming, that there's no great easy prescriptions, there's no great easy rules. So, and I'm also an academic, I work at U of C, so my problem-solving approach tends to be research-based, right? So I don't have enough information. We can't make really informed decisions and think of the best way to do this. We want to be able to create life across the board or increase shalom is one way I would say it. So it's flourishing of life, but we don't have enough info to do that. So we start looking at research, and often the research is lacking because it's focused in very particular ways, right? How does grazing get as much weight on the animal as possible? How do animals learn how to graze to put weight on, right? Not how do they learn how to graze so we can get them to eat the things we want to on our site, or why are they preferring sedges and riparian areas over other grasses? Like that kind of info is lacking. How do you manage alternative animals? Because it's also beef focused as well in a sustainable grazing environment where they have very different social needs. So yeah, the only way the info didn't exist. So then we start collaborating with people we know at Olds College, people who do our fencing. Lloyd used to with Olds College, so that was hugely helpful, a real blessing. So we could work with Lloyd and get into these projects.
Yeah.
Now the one we're doing now is tons of soil samples. We're looking at a baseline for carbon. So if grazing can sequester carbon in the soil, that's terrific and a real ecological service that farms can provide. But we need to know what the baseline of carbon is in those soils so we can look at how the management practices increase that carbon over time. Yeah, so that kind of thing, I guess.
Brilliant. Well, and then I guess what you're saying too is that because you're using yak, which is not very common in the Alberta context, the more information you can gather, the better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, they were imported in the 20s and 30s as an alternative to beef for grazing, like as a replacement for buffalo, and they did fantastic in North America across the board. But they didn't meet that sort of external export market for beef, and that's what our ranching industry really kind of exists for. So that importation was stopped. So there's a fair number around, more than one might think, because they do so well. But the research is lacking. We have one big book that was translated by, I can't remember which American government department, of a collaborative research, massive research that was done between the Soviet and the Chinese governments. And that's been translated. And it's called The Yak, and it's this, big fat book.
The Yak. That's awesome. And so you guys are not in Sundre currently. So tell us how that works. You guys live in the city, but you also live at the farm. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Jerremie works at the University of Calgary. And it was just a question of what's the easiest way to commute. And because his job is pretty much year-round, heaviest in the fall, winter, spring-ish. And then the farm really kind of ramps up spring, summer. Just commuting back and forth from Sundre in the winter time just didn't seem like a real option. Whereas, driving back and forth in the summertime is not so bad. So that's why we
do have a house on the farm too.
Yeah, so we do have a place to stay out there if our work takes us beyond just a day's worth of work.
Yeah, like certain times a year, like we're haying right now, or just finished up actually. So I stayed overnight at the farm, and came only in early this morning for my university meetings, which we're online right now, of course, but because COVID. But because I didn't finish baling until around 7:30 at night. I think I did too, because it rained last night and this morning. That would have been really disappointing if all the hay I had cut and raked had just gotten soggy and I couldn't do anything with it. But that is the one challenge. Going back and forth is trying to catch those really nice windows for doing things like haying, where I got 4 hours and it's clear and I can get a bunch of baling done or something. You don't always know because forecasts aren't 100%, but we have some technology for that, cameras and stuff on the farm that we can check remotely and keep an idea. So as we sort of work back and forth between the two places, we can manage it pretty well.
And the yaks don't need tending to every single day. So, and we do share kind of the duties with Jonathan. So that works out fairly well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Finding a nice balance between urban and rural, which with YYC Growers, we've always been trying to build that bridge. And so you guys are doing it single-handedly. So
I mean, one of the reasons we do potatoes, I talked about potatoes at the beginning because I love potatoes, but I remember in the early days of YYC Growers, it was what can we grow? And it's like, well, we have land out of the city. So things that are really space intensive, like potatoes, like, okay, we'll totally do potatoes.
Yeah.
Because we love those things. I mean, I love to eat them anyway. I can geek out about them. But they're also land intensive. We're salad greens, which I know you adore and you eat.
No, because we're just not there enough to take care of salad greens. Potatoes are pretty, independent.
They're pretty. Potatoes are pretty. Or salad greens are, not my thing.
I'm sorry. These guys have been razzing each other about potatoes versus salad greens. we were sharing.
I remember I was
together.
helping Rod once a few years ago to help harvest. I'm telling stories about Rod now. And in his truck, he had this bag of salad greens. He would just snack on them while he was working and driving around. I was amazed. I was also amazed at the rapidity which he can harvest salad greens. Frankly, it was
Yeah.
so much faster for that kid.
Yeah. Learned skills. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe it'd be fun to throw up a couple more of those yak pictures behind you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, here we go.
Yeah. Here.
We'll try and not move at all.
Okay, we'll hold very still. So here's.
What's the ear type?
Do we know this guy's name?
No.
M2.
He's 3M, which means he's actually I think this one is getting butchered this fall on November 12th.
Oh,
Oh.
So if you're looking for yak, I mean,
So he's dinner.
he's dinner.
meat. 3M. I mean, it stands for male, but now maybe it's meat.
So when you're talking riparian, so that previous photo, is that the area that you see behind them there?
You can come in, just don't move.
Okay.
Yeah, so our farm is actually every paddock we have has a substantial riparian area, which means a wetland, whether that means it's wet all year round or it has substantial amounts of water below the surface of the soil as opposed to standing water on the surface. So we have agreements for the management. We can't graze full riparian areas until after August 1 because they're nesting habitats for bird life. Oh, your head is not.
I know, it's just really not like this. I'm sorry.
And here we go. And so those riparian areas, the yaks actually prefer sedges anyway, which are the grasses that grow in a wetland, because they're nutrient dense, and in a yak's natural range, there are a few nutrient dense food sources, except in high altitude alpine riparian areas. So when you put them in a new paddock, they just sort of have like a pool party. They just pile into the water. Wetlands, that's what they eat first.
Interesting.
No, we don't have protective dogs. They wouldn't be a bad idea. I mean, John and Andre have them. I admit I'm not hugely comfortable around dogs, so they would protect the farm for me too. But they aren't. So they have a slightly different herd behavior than cattle. They will clump up much more easily. In fact, when we first got them, our fencing wasn't up to the job because they jump really well. So we had adequate cattle fencing, but they would jump over it. So they got out once. So we called the neighbors. They brought some horses over. We're going to herd them back up. And instead of being herded by the horses, they formed this phalanx. They all went shoulder to shoulder, horns out, and the horse panicked. And the horse would not go close to them.
So it was like a wall of yaks shoulder to shoulder with their horns out. It was
if
great.
I walk up to the herd in the fog, especially if I'm not wearing my hat, the vision's not great, I guess. Next thing you know, I'm facing a phalanx of yaks. We were having some trouble with coyotes this year, and I would come in and the herd would be clumped up, and they moved the small ones in. So yeah, we generally, in the area around Sundre, there is huge problems with predator pressures. People have lost llamas to mountain lions, you name it. And we've had, this year we actually had some issues, but generally we have no issues with predator pressure, whether it's bears, which there are, and we know there's several, talking to conservation officers, mountain lions, or anything like that. So yeah, they've got good instincts for that. They stick close together, even when they calf. They don't go off on their own to calve. They calf within the group, and there's normally not just the yak who's having the calf. There's normally one or two others right there with them, like doula, midwife,
No way,
security detail. I'm not exactly sure what all their roles are, but and you watch the herd. There's like babysitting all the time. So the calves aren't always stuck to their moms, because that would drive any mom crazy. But there is always a slightly older, either a yearling or generally a 2-year-old with the calves. So the calves are in a group playing together, and they only have a couple 2-year-olds with them. I don't know how they decided this, but
that sounds fascinating.
It's really cool to watch.
Yeah, how much? So in your the yak book, do they talk about that kind of behavior?
No, the yak book has tons of details about disease and parasite issues they have, which tend to be more shared with sheep and goats than cattle, and most of them don't exist here, which is nice. So we don't have a lot of issues. We don't normally have to do much by way of medication or treatment. It talks a lot about birthing, about feeding, about milk production, which we don't milk them.
No.
But you could do if you really wanted to. And everything else about them, but it has very little on the sort of social lives of the herd, which is too bad. It talks about how much they breathe. Their hearts beat substantially faster than cattle.
Wow.
Their oxygen cycling is much better because they're high altitude animals.
Yeah. And So we are looking for information about how much methane they produce.
Oh, no, there was something
There
on
was
that.
something on that? Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
it is less.
Yeah.
Because of efficiency of digestion.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. And that must be the similar with their feces that breaks down easier too. Is that
Yeah.
connected
Yeah.
You
somehow?
can definitely see the difference.
They spend a lot
Fascinating.
less time eating, like active eating. There's a lot of research on that, which is the percentage of time an animal spends actively eating versus socializing and nibbling for grazing animals. And they spend substantially less time than cattle in that active eating stage.
And JS, I don't know if you guys can see that, but a phalanx,
Phalanx of yaks.
is
Yeah.
that's what a group is called?
No, but that's what they
kind
form.
of like
It's like what you'd see from the Greek or Roman armies and antiquity, where they make that shield wall and all the spears point out, and there's really no way to get close to it.
Mm-hmm.
Form a square. That's what the yaks do. They totally do.
That's incredible. I learned something new.
we've got the raw fiber, and we're trying to figure out how to get it processed into yarn. We have some recommendations from, there's a woolen processing mill very close.
Yep.
That we have to look into. It's a lot like combing out a really big dog. So when in the spring, if you have dogs with like the guard hairs and you're just combing out that fluffy undercoat, it's very similar. It's like I think we are using dog combs, aren't we?
Yep.
Yeah. So you just brush it out, and you've got this blizzard of that soft fuzzy hair.
So we're not selling the fiber right now.
No, we're
The
just working on
plan is
that.
we probably will pretty soon. It's partly getting the herd used to the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And getting our own process in place. All the equipment we can get is cattle sized. So our head gates and stalls are too big for most of the yaks.
Oh, interesting.
So to process them safely for us and for them, it requires them to be either really tame and really used to it, or better sized equipment. So we're just kind of working through that. I'm hoping in a year or two we'll have a really nice system and be able to process it safely. The meat, once people try it, it sells pretty well and it's pretty easy. We sold at Cochrane Farmers Market last year. It's like super beefy beef. So it doesn't taste like bison or it doesn't taste like other game. It tastes like beef, just intensely like grass-finished beef, but even beefier. It's a delight.
It is wonderful. We would love to tell everybody about how wonderful yak is. It's a bit of an advertising nightmare, to be honest. The word yak, it's just we're struggling with
yak and barley soup doesn't sound as good
No.
as beef and barley soup.
It's got challenges. So we're trying to so I know part of that question was, is it hard to find a market for the meat or fiber? So advertising is a bit of a challenge. We're trying to figure out how that works.
Right. Yeah. Yak doesn't lend itself well
Yeah.
to a catchy slogan, does it?
No, I think the best we've come up with is once you've had yak, you can't go back.
Oh,
That's about as far as we can.
Nice.
We're working on it.
I'm just looking at Heather's comment there. So yeah, the dominion thing. So in Genesis, there's two different, when they're talking about humanity, when God creates humanity in this role looking after creation, there's two different sets of language used. There is kingly language used, which people get dominion from. But more importantly, what follows that is the priestly language is used, where you get abad and shamar, to serve and preserve creation. And it's very clear, whether it's from the naming of the animals or anything else, that in the agrarian culture that story was originally told about our relationship with God and our relationship with creation, was that it was a priestly service relationship, that we are to increase shalom, increase the depth and breadth of life, both domestic and wild. So yeah, I mean, the church in the past has some elements of it, have always focused on abad and shamar. The Orthodox Church has done that well. In fact, parts of the Catholic Church, Anglican Church, you name it, different denominations have done that well. But in the mainstream, yeah, promise keepers, that kind of stuff. The evangelical side tends to focus on the dominion side, tends to focus very much on the individual and people. And that's almost, I think, a cultural influence in North America. It's not an essential component of scripture or the church. So, there is a lot there for really good theology of stewardship and creation. And I mean, for me, I find it really exciting because it's like God says, well, here's a gift of land for you to care for. not just waiting around for, I don't know, heaven in the end. Right now is important stuff for you to do. I want you to extend love and grace to all this land and all these animals you have. And I don't know, that's super exciting and fun. And it tastes good. I mean, you know, potatoes, rye, yeah, so that's a blessing too.
Yeah. Thanks for those comments, you guys. We are getting close to the end. Yeah, and the Genesis stuff, I used to teach Old Testament as well, and that first chapter of Genesis has got a lot of good stuff in there. Unfortunately, it's been distorted a ton, and so very grateful that there's people like Jerremie and Rita who are reversing that kind of that sense, and so appreciate you guys. So yeah, our final question we like to ask as we head out is, what is the most satisfying thing for you guys about farming?
30 seconds.
Okay, you do it.
I love seeing the bounty of nature when you plant something like a seed and it comes back, and you've got, or like a potato, and you come back and you pull up the plant and you've got like dozens of potatoes, and it feels like you've got potatoes for ages, and just how incredibly generous creation is. It's very humbling, and it's really blessed. It's a wonderful blessing. So that's my favorite part of farming.
Yeah, I like the relationship we have with the plants. Feels like you're collaborating with those plants and the animals. Like you get this sort of really interesting kind of almost loving relationship with them. The other day, actually, I had to carry one of the calves who I've named Snuggles now, which is probably a terrible idea for naming an animal Snuggles. But
what do you Snuggles?
It was kind of wimpy, and he couldn't keep with the herd. And I found him by himself, and I picked him up, and he just sort of snuggled in. And I had yak Snuggles. My kids are too big to do that with now, and the yak smelled lovely. And so yeah, yak Snuggles were like a new high. Like never happens. They don't normally go for that kind of thing. So
yeah,
that is incredible. So good to spend some time with you guys.